Do you know who I am? I'm kind of a big deal.
Well, welcome again to another edition of Overtime with Dr. Michael Jacobs. I'm Chip Franklin. We normally talk about injuries, but let's talk about people that are leaving the game for reasons other than injuries, like managers and general managers. You could make a case that the injuries this year and the Orioles' lack of success so far here coming up on the All-Star break was not Hyde's fault, but was more Elias's fault. And I think most people in the league are saying the Orioles didn't really prepare themselves in the offseason with pitching. Would you agree?
Well, first of all, we just had Freddie on, and we can circle back on a number of things. First
Freddie
of all,
Gonzalez, we just had, who was another coach for the Braves and was with the Orioles until recently.
First of all, I've been there for all these years, and the players loved Brandon Hyde. There was no sense of he so-called lost the team. The players loved him. I mean, the team worked together, and there was no sense that you seem to be getting from the Washington Nationals, where Davey Martinez apparently said the coaches aren't at fault and implicitly blamed the players. And of course, the players, who of course are the ones who play, took that personally. This is not a Billy Martin situation where you got a crazy clubhouse. The players loved Brandon Hyde. Number two, and most egregiously, which is not Brandon's fault, not only did they not supply him with the pitchers, but the pitchers that he had weren't pitching. Morton was getting hammered. Rogers was not even up with the team. The other pitchers were not pitching as well as they pitched. As luck would have it, and it had nothing to do with changing managers, suddenly Rogers comes up and is throwing 95 instead of 89. Suddenly Morton figures out how to get his curveball to behave. Suddenly Kramer is pitching better. Summer Kittredge is finally finding his groove. Batista's getting better. And all that came together randomly. It had nothing to do with firing Brandon Hyde. And finally, as Mike Bordick pointed out, when we were with Freddie Gonzalez, they got rid of Freddie Gonzalez, who had the team fundamentals playing. They were throwing to the right base. They were playing sound baseball last year. They replaced him. And for the first 2 months of the year, the Orioles were throwing the ball around like a little league team. And obviously, somebody drilled down on the fundamentals, and that finally started to pay effect. So firing Brandon made no sense whatsoever. As I said to you before, and I have never met the present owner, Mr. Rubenstein, but I certainly was intimately involved with Mr. Angelos. The owners listen too much to the media. I used to say the newspapers, but the media. They have friends who talk to them. They have ex-ball players who talk to them. And they feel pressure to change something when they can't ride out the storm, particularly new owners. You know, if you do look at the Braves or some of the teams that have had long-time ownership, it's unusual to see them make that change. I was stunned that Rizzo got fired, in as much as the draft is coming up. And he did make a good trade when he got the Soto trade. And he's got young players. So you would expect that the GM should give a new manager a run for the money as opposed to firing him. So I suspect there's something else going on between Rizzo and the owner besides just wanting to make a trade. But what we did made no sense at all. The team.
Well, but hold on. But it's the old saying is, of course, you can't fire 25 players, right? And you also you're in a very competitive environment with people, what they're going to do on weeknights and on the weekend with ticket sales and what they're going to watch on television. And that kind of change may not be fair, obviously, to Brandon. And I agree with you. I think, I wasn't in the clubhouse, but, everything, we've heard players talk on these podcasts and in the media shows that they love the guy. And I think that, this is the old thing of like, let's show the fans that we care about enough to make a change. And you're not pulling one of their favorites off the field. You're pulling a guy in the dugout that nobody sees except for press conferences. And I think that's part of it. I think that they don't want to lose in next year's ticket sales. They want people to think that they're constantly moving forward. And I mean, that's the only thing I can think about. And the reason they do these things is for public perception.
I think that's wrong. I think the team would have started winning with Brandon.
Oh, I totally agree with that. I mean, that's why they do it.
In today's world of analytics, there's no question that lineups are being sent down, recommendations from the analytics people after they study who does what with whom. And so the managers don't even have the complete freedom, I don't think, to make whatever lineup they sense they want to make. And Brandon, it was obvious the team's performance was related to dismal pitching, which probably caused the players to try to overplay, if you know what I mean, to hit 5-run homers. And as suddenly Morton and Rogers and Kramer started pitching better, and the bullpen got healthy, he should have had the opportunity to play through that. I mean, nothing Masalino, who's a perfectly wonderful manager guy, does is really change anything. It's the classic case of the players are just playing better. And given the situation, I think that was an unfair move. I don't think Mike deserved to be fired either, in as much as he didn't do a lot in the offseason to help the pitching. But at the same time, the team is now playing above 500 since the team he did assemble is starting to perform.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned analytics. I mean, in some cases, for example, Jackson Holiday, if you used analytics, wouldn't be leading off. His on-base percentage, as you heard Bordick says, is a little over 300, But I think the fans like him. The media, everybody likes the guy. There's nothing to not like about the kid. And he's in the news now because of his brother in the draft coming up. And I think that to your point, I think analytics have a place, but they can't be the only decision. It's like in Moneyball, they have that great scene where they're sitting around and one of the scouts says, he has a good looking girlfriend, which is a good sign. And I have no doubt that idiotic conversations like that have gone on about these guys, treating them like animals instead of human beings. And, giving a guy confidence, telling us somebody that you're going to be there for me. I think that had a lot to do with Jackson's resurgence. I think that being told you're going to be our leadoff hitter. We trust you. I've seen it before. He keeps his hips in there. He can hit those balls to left center out of the park. The same with Gunnar. I personally think Gunnar would be a better leadoff hitter than Jackson. But we don't have the old traditional thing where number 4 is your clean-out hitter. It's just that everything's kind of changed since we were kids watching baseball, and I'm trying to go with it. But I think let's go back to Elias and say, what report card would you give him for where we are here? Halfway through the season?
Well, first of all, we all agree analytics can't be the only option. I've voiced that many times. And I'm sure that the way the Orioles are run now, if Jackson's on-base percentage may not be typical of a leadoff hitter, I am sure the performance people, the front office people, Mike, the other people he has, the manager, the hitting coach, I am sure they all sat down together and did, in that particular case, decide that it's a play we want to do. I'm not so sure that they guaranteed him that spot, but I think they probably said, let's see how it goes. I do think Jackson has been told he's the second baseman, just like we said with Willie Mays and Leo DeRocher when he said to Willie Mays, you're my center fielder, don't worry about it. And you could also take the all-star approach with Willie Mays, who through the prime of his career batted leadoff in all the all-star games. Of course, the manager said, he's my best player. I want him up as much as possible. So
and there are guys, though, but there are guys, talking about analytics, there are guys whose average may be 260 and they're in a leadoff spot, but they average like 5.5 pitches per bat. So that means in 4 at-bats, they basically taken up 20%, 25% of what that pitcher is going to throw for an entire game. Those kind of things add up. And that's the kind of analytics I agree with. And I think it's smart, right? The positioning of players, we see it all the time now. The second baseman is halfway up the middle. And I think Gunnar and Holiday had 2 hits taken away because of the positioning of the second baseman or the shortstop in those guys' cases. And that kind of analytics I get, right? I get, but it also what they're taking away is, when Adley's back there and he sees the guy move up in the box a little bit, I mean, he's looking for a curveball, and that way you can. So if you've been told from the bench to throw a fastball low and away, right, that's good. But if they say to throw a sweeper and the guy's up in the box, if you hang it a little bit, he's going to be all over it. I mean, that's the thing I loved about catching as a kid and in high school and college. To see it now that it's been taken away from some of these guys, that bugs the crap out of me.
we've had this discussion too. I agree 100% that the game is supposed to be played by the players, and the great players figure that out. Mike Mussina, who is the most brilliant pitcher with Jim Palmer I've ever met, wasn't real chatty, but he would explain to me, if I said, "Why'd you throw that pitch?" He'd say, "I saw him cheating this way, and I saw a reason to do it." And when I asked him, what if the catcher called something else from the bench? I told you this before. His answer was, "I'm responsible for the result of that pitch. I'm throwing what I want to throw." And that goes for everybody. I think that's what made Mike Bordick and Cal Ripken brilliant shortstops, particularly later in their careers. They would adjust to what the pitcher was throwing because they could see the signs. They would also adjust to their skills. I mean, I've talked to Mike about it briefly. Later in his career, he really couldn't make that throw from the hole sometimes. So instead of playing there, he would cheat a little bit the other way, knowing if it went there, he could make the throw. I think a lot of that's been lost, just like quarterbacks don't call their own game. I saw a show on the Jets Colts Super Bowl with Joe Namath, and it was even though I love the Colts, and it was one of the lousy days of my sports life when the Colts lost. Joe Namath said, "You know what? I called every play in that game at the line of scrimmage. I called the formation, I looked at the defense, and I called what I thought would work." You can't do that anymore, and that's what made great ball players. And I hate it in tennis. Was used to be one of the few games where the players had to adjust on their own, and now they're looking to their stands all the time. And for Mike Elias, it's different. I think Mike has done the greatest job of rebuilding a farm system since Branch Rickey. I mean, our farm system was a mess. Every minor league team had a different philosophy. And I don't like the way he cleaned house completely, because I think some people were worth keeping. But nonetheless, I think that is it's the greatest job I've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, if you go back and look at that, I mean, the analytics said Lasorda should never put Kirk Gibson up in that position, right? I mean, you look at this, they should. If you ask yourself, I mean, John Unitas, once I saw him talking about, he says about calling his own plays. He goes, "I call my own plays, except when I get home, then Mrs. Unitas is in charge." So these guys that got it, they understood the subtlety of it. They'd come up and they could look across the line, and they could tell whether the linebacker was going to blitz just by looking at his body language, the kind of stuff that you can only tell when you're bringing up to line. That's what's really cool about the Commanders and Jaden Daniels. They let that kid call about 40% of his plays at the line of scrimmage, which goes to show you in his success, I think that maybe they got to start reevaluating that on the field and just, let some of these kids just play the game. Great stuff. Overtime, Dr. Michael Jacobs. You can see him obviously every week on the Bmore Baseball Podcast with Bordick and Coleman. I'm Chip Franklin. We'll do this again next time.
Do you know who I am? I'm kind of a big deal.